All right. As we wait for our online audiences to come on to tonight's very important community conference series, where every last Thursday of the month at 7 p.m., we are live on all platforms to bring to you the information that's key, critical, and important to the moment. So I'm so gracious that we're on here tonight. We're gonna wait for our we're gonna wait for our audiences to join. And we're so grateful to be on tonight. We've got a beautiful panel and discussion tonight planned with all of our guests. I got a few announcements as well as we do every uh, last Thursday of the month when we're here on the community conference. So we're just going to wait for our live audience to come in. We've got people joining us on Facebook. We got folks joining us on Zoom. We've got folks joining us on YouTube. We've got folks joining us on Instagram, Twitter. So it's an exciting night, and I'm so gracious that we're discussing this very important and germane topic of making sure that folks know where to vote, how to vote, what we're voting on, how to be more civically engaged and participation in that civic engagement and in our communities. And we have ballot proposals that we're voting on as well. And lastly, we will be talking about and we will extensively be discussing redistricting, the process in which our community is redrawn, the political line, excuse me, of our community is redrawn every 10 years based on the United States Census and the population count here in the state of New York. So again, as we're waiting for our live audience to join, we're so gracious for our amazing panel tonight. Just going to give a few more minutes for viewers from all across the 31st Assembly District to watch tonight's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful live stream panel discussion that we're going to have. We're talking about voting. We're talking about civic participation. We're talking about what's on the ballot, and we're talking about redistricting, how our communities are redrawn every 10 years according to the United States Census. So thank you to all of our viewers. I see our numbers going up. I'm so gracious that people are joining, hopping on, asking questions, as there will be a Q&A tonight. So I'm so gracious for that. The first thing I want to do before we invite our panelists up, I want to name them, but I also want to before I do that, I want to briefly give a greetings and community address for all of our viewers who are joining on to tonight. So I'm really, really excited and grateful for this opportunity. So many of my constituents have reached out to me, to my office, to the community about the need for housing. I want to announce tonight that over 253 units are now live on the New York City Housing Connect's website run by HPD. So we want to make sure, Housing Connect. We want to make sure that anybody who's looking for housing here in the 31st Assembly District knows to reach out to my office, 718-327-1845, 718-327-1845 for the Rockaway office. And then for the satellite office in South Ozone Park, 718-322-4958, 718-322-4958. So if you are in need of housing and you need help with registering for the housing lottery, reach out to my office and we'll get you connected with the HPD housing ambassador that'll help walk you through the applications process. The application closes December 8th, so please make sure that if you need housing, that you apply so that you're entered into the lottery. We are in several weeks into our senior wellness program. So gracious for City Parks Foundation, for Elizabeth Madison, for the weight loss training program that she has here in Rosedale, in Southeast Queens, that's providing our seniors 2 times a week, both fitness and nutrition education. So please come on out. We've got a few more weeks left of the program, and then it goes into hiatus into the spring. So reach out to my office for information on that. Tonight, I'm also working with my colleague, New York State Senator James Sanders Jr., as we work to rename the community center in Edgemere after the late, great Dr. Deborah Hoyle. So I'm encouraging people to join online, join in person, 5710 Rockaway Beach Boulevard, support my colleague and support their effort and initiative to name the community center after a great, beloved community leader. I want to also remind folks, and I'm going to say this several times throughout tonight's community conference series. We've been doing these series since I've taken office almost a year ago. In 2 weeks, it'll be a year since I've been your New York State Assembly member. And I want to remind you that all night I'm going to be reminding people that November 17th, there will be a hearing, a redistricting hearing where you can testify and share your thoughts, your feelings about the first draft maps in the redistricting process. And we're going to go over that when we have our redistricting expert come on to tonight's community conference series. And so we want to make sure that you know that November 17th at 3 p.m., you can testify at York College and speak about what your opinions are around the lines. We want to make sure that you know about early voting. We want to make sure you know about making sure you go out to vote. And these are all the things that we're going to be discussing at tonight's community conference. So I'm grateful for our panelists. We have Dr. Sarah Saeed, who's the chair and executive director of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission. We also have Brother John Owens, Esquire, the NAACP Jamaica branch, who is going to speak to us tonight about a variety of issues. We're so grateful to have him on tonight. We also will be joined later on by Isis McIntosh Green, who's the Deputy Co-Executive Director for the Independent Redistricting Commission here in the state of New York. And we have Karen Peterson Young, who is from True Democracy, New York. We're so grateful and thankful for all the panelists who are joining us now tonight. And Isis will be on later to talk about redistricting. So we're so grateful to have her on. And let me thank my staff, my team, my colleagues for joining me tonight, for joining this very important panel discussion. We want to make sure that communities that look like mine, look like the ones that I represent, that look like the ones that who are on the call tonight represents and are fighting for, have the knowledge and the information and understand what is expected of them over the next couple of weeks as we redraw districts, as we begin to vote over the next couple of days that we're getting ready to vote, what's on the ballot and what are the long-lasting consequences of us being participatory in this democracy here in the city of New York. So I'm so gracious that Dr. Sarah Saeed is going to be going up first and talking about voter education. We're so excited for her work. So Dr. Saeed, tell us a little bit about what your organization, your agency does and how it's important for our community. Dr. Saeed.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. It is really, really great to be on this panel with you and the rest of the panelists. It's a really important time for us to be having this conversation. As you all know, we just have a couple of days left in the election period. And we want to do everything we can to encourage New Yorkers to get out there and vote. I'm not sure if I should begin to share my slides or if someone else will. Or
Yep.
Oh, sorry. I think you're on mute.
Oh, yep. You can share your slides right on here.
Okay. Can you?
We'll open up the share settings now. My chief of staff is going to be.
It might be better if someone. Yeah, it's looking like I can't do it from my computer. So sorry.
Okay. No worries. So that'll be populated in 1 second as the chief of staff is getting that going. So tell us a little bit about who you are, your organization. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm the chair and executive director of the Civic Engagement Commission. And actually, very interesting story. 3 years ago, right around this time, New Yorkers went to the polls and voted to create the Civic Engagement Commission, right? Government offices start in different ways. The elected official could establish an office. It could be something that is done by an agency. The CEC was started by voters. Voters actually came together in the Charter Revision Commission process and decided to push forward the creation of this agency. And in November of 2018, it was put on the ballot and people voted to create it. And the Civic Engagement Commission mission is to increase civic participation, promote civic trust, and strengthen democracy in New York City. And we have a couple of different programs that we are responsible for by the New York City Charter. One of them is citywide participatory budgeting. Another one is providing language assistance at poll sites. And a third is strengthening community boards. And Assembly Member, I know that you were at a very young age involved in your local community board. So we're providing trainings to community board members so that they can be better versed in how to be a strong community board member that engages their communities. And those are a couple of the areas that we're mandated to work in. We also have another area, which is just to build broad civic partnerships with private and public entities, work across intergov offices to promote civic engagement. That's kind of in a nutshell what the CEC does. And we've only been around for about 2 years now. I mean, a little bit over 2 years. We were announced in April of 2019. And the commission has a couple of, it has 8 appointees that are named by the mayor, 2 by city council, and 5, 1 each by borough president. So it's seeking to be an inclusive body with various appointees from city government. So I don't know if the slideshow is ready yet.
Well, while we're waiting for that, let me.
I'm happy to just talk through it as I have it in front of me. The voters
let's talk through it
people can't see it. Yeah. So I wanted to also encourage people, like the commission has public meetings, so you're welcome to join us. You can find out more by going to nyc.gov/civic engagement. One thing I wanted to note is that civic engagement is quite broad, right? Like as an idea, a lot of us don't go around talking about civic engagement, but there's so many different things that are captured in it. So I want to make sure that we all know some of those things, right? Voting is one aspect of it, and we are working in that space. There's also volunteerism. There is, regular volunteering or one-time volunteering. You can also become civically engaged by joining a community board or joining the board of your local community-based organization. You can join a program like AmeriCorps, for example, and then you can also become a public servant. So there's lots of different ways that people can get civically engaged, and we want to encourage all of those ways. I was given 3 sort of questions that I was told I should try to answer. The first question is, why does our vote matter in New York City? And I wanted to make a case for 4 core ideas around this. One is love, the other is courage, the third is agency and power, and the fourth is responsibility. Love matters for voting. A lot of people don't necessarily think about these things together, but love matters for voting because it is about, I fundamentally believe it's about your loving yourself, loving your family, loving your community, loving your, the city and state you live in and the country you live in. Enough that you speak up, and you speak up not just for yourself, but you speak up for your community, and you speak up for the most vulnerable people in your community to receive the kind of care that everyone deserves, in our country. It's also about courage, the courage to speak up and not be shy about what you believe, right? To learn about the issues that matter to you and to have an opinion and to voice it. Agency and power is the third core idea. I believe that, in a democracy, the people who participate are the ones who have the power to shape what that democracy looks like. We have agency to participate or not participate. And when we participate, we are creating an inclusive democracy. And the fourth area is responsibility. I think we all have to be responsible for our democracy. Democracy is a process. It's not something that is handed to us on a silver platter. We have to work at it every single day. And I believe it's a collective responsibility to vote and to participate and become civically engaged. The other question I was given is, what is the commission doing to increase participation among all New Yorkers, especially in Black and Brown communities? And wanted to talk here a little bit about language justice and language access. So the Civic Engagement Commission runs a poll site language assistance program, which is expanding language access for voters with limited English proficiency. This used to be run by the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and it does not duplicate services provided by the Board of Elections in any county for any language. For example, the Board of Elections is required under the Voting Rights Act to provide interpretation in Spanish across the city. So CEC does not provide Spanish as an example. We do add some languages in counties that are not covered under the Voting Rights Act. And we have a total of 11 languages that we're covering through our program. And we served in November 2020 general election, and then most recently in the June primary. And then in coming up in the last weekend of early voting, we will be providing services at 25 sites in Yiddish services, actually in honor of in deference to Shabbat. We're providing services in Yiddish on Friday rather than Saturday. The languages that we're providing services in include Arabic, Bangla, Chinese, French, Haitian Creole, Italian, Korean, Polish, Russian, Urdu, and Yiddish. And we'll be there Saturday and Sunday. And then on election day, we have 75 sites across the city. If you're interested in learning more about this program, you can visit a website, participate.nyc.gov. Where there is a voting center that lets you find the poll site location for where we're providing services. And then also on the site, importantly, you can watch and share public service announcements that are about knowing your rights to interpretation and accessibility in the poll sites, as well as early voting. We really encourage people to get on this site, download the videos, share them with your friends and family and your community members, because we want everyone to know that you do have the right to bring your own interpreter when you go to vote, and also have rights in terms of disability and access. Another area that we're working in is the Civic Engagement Commission is participating in the Task Force for Racial Inclusion and Equity, which is an interagency task force that has been assembled to respond to the equity gaps in terms of COVID infection rates and vaccine rates. And we are running neighborhood coalitions across the city that promote vaccine awareness, as well as we are running a participatory budgeting process in these neighborhoods that's focused on recovery. You can go to the website nyc.gov/TRIE, TRIE, to learn about the neighborhoods. Assemblymember, we do have some neighborhoods that are in your district. Those include, I'm not sure which zips are related to you, but in South Ozone Park, 11420 is one of the zip codes. Rockaway, Broad Channel, 11691, 692, 693, and 694 are neighborhoods that we're working in. We're running, as I said, a participatory budgeting process. There's a proposal development phase underway. We'll be asking residents to vote on proposals a little bit later in December and January. Would love to reconnect with you, when that ballot is ready to share with the residents in your district. And then lastly, the question I was, sorry, yeah?
No, I was saying thank you for that information, Dr. Saeed.
Yeah. The last question I was asked to answer, and I'm going to be really quick here and call it an end, is that will education and participation increase trust in the democratic process? And what I want to say about that, I think I want to just be able to say, yes, it will, right? Of course it will. We want to see more people participate. And we do think that when people participate, they feel the agency and power of, hearing like their own voice, hearing their community members speak up. I do think it's a little bit more nuanced, that answer to that question, because I think that in order for there to be trust, there has to be a relationship between communities and government, between constituencies and government. It's not just about people speaking, they have to also feel heard, right? So people in government have a responsibility to the folks who live in their districts to listen to them. When people don't feel heard, that's when they lose trust. So I think it's a two-way street. And we also have to be very vigilant as people in government that we are upholding our part of the trust to listen, and not just listen, but to act on what people want. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saeed, and thank you all for being on tonight. It's so important that as we're coming on early voting, as we're talking about civic participation, October 23rd to October 31st is early voting. So please make sure you get out and vote. There's so much on the ballot. We have city candidates for all citywide offices. We've got candidates, or excuse me, we've got 5 ballot proposals, which we will talk about tonight. So there's so much that we're voting on. And of course, we're going to be talking about redistricting tonight, the process in which our communities are redrawn every 10 years as it relates to the census. John, if I can get you to mute back there as I introduce you. Got the background. All right. Great, great, great. So again, thank you, Dr. Saeed. And we have some more questions on the back end that we'll be taking from our amazing audiences who are joining us on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. We're already starting to see some of the comments roll in. So we're so grateful that people will have the opportunity to comment, to ask questions, and to share their concerns. I also, again, I'm going to be hammering this point home that redistricting is going to be really, really important. It's another part of the civic participation process where for the first time in New York State history, we'll have the opportunity to allow everyday average New Yorkers to share what they think that the political lines of their community should look like. This is the first time we've done it in the state's history. Many states across the country have done this, but we want to make sure people have a voice and are a part of that very important democratic process. And so our next speaker tonight will be our second panelist tonight will be Brother John Owens Jr. Esquire, who is a Civic Engagement Committee member for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People here in the state of New York. He's a member of the Jamaica branch, committee. So we're really excited. NAACP, thank you guys for being in the house tonight. Brother Owens, take it away.
Thank you for having me. And, it's an honor as well. This is part of my civic engagement. So I will also attempt to be brief just to make sure that we're mindful of time. So ultimately, the ballot proposals are on this year for amendments to the Constitution. So the state Constitution requires that 2 successive legislative sessions have to happen where they vote on something, and then it comes to the voters to ultimately decide whether there'll be amendments to the Constitution. This year, there'll be 5 as mentioned. So I've given the overall short title for them. So you'll probably hear more about number 1 near the end when we talk about redistricting, because that has a lot to be involved with that one. So that's the most controversial one in terms of most people's discussion. Proposal number 2 is a right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. Proposal 3 and 4 are actually sponsored by Assemblymember Vanell and Senator Comrie. So they were local sponsors here. So one is to eliminate the 10-day advance voting registration requirement, and the other is to authorize no excuse absentee ballot. So what a lot of people probably did during the pandemic, they were able to mail in their ballot. that would make that a permanent function and removing some of the language in the state constitution that currently prohibits that without an executive order by the governor. And finally, one, to increase the jurisdiction of the New York City Civil Court. There's websites that you can go to. The State Board of Election has a website where you can read the language in advance. You can also go to the New York City Board of Elections website, put in your poll site locator, and it can give you a sample ballot once you put in your address. So you have the ability to read this all in advance, but I figured I would just give you the language. I realize I am getting older because I am now beginning to fully appreciate how small the print is on the ballot, but it is definitely small. So it's probably convenient to read ahead of time just so you get a sense of what all of the language is on these respective proposals. And just be mindful that from my experience was that the 5 proposals are split on the back of each of the 2 pages of a ballot. So if you have 2 pages, remember to turn over both pages because they're probably split on both pages.
And thank you.
Okay. So what I will do is just sort of talk about quickly some of the quick ones with respect to proposal 1. So it's a lot in there, but ultimately what it attempts to do can be broken down into a summary of like 8 major things. So 1 is to permanently freeze the number of state senators at 63. 1 is to make sure that all inhabitants of the state are counted in redistricting. 1 is to memorialize in the state constitution, which was passed into law in 2010, that incarcerated people are counted in their last place of residence as opposed to where they're incarcerated, to remove some restrictions on how Senate lines are drawn, and also to delete certain language in the Constitution that has been ruled as unconstitutional. This document was created in 1894, so there is a lot of old provisions in there that have not been updated. Like I said, these are some of the ones that I think will make more sense when we get to the redistricting discussion. So I'll just kind of have them up there. But a number of the proposals in 1 attempt to change some of the procedures and votings around the amendment that was done in 2014 to streamline the processes, to adjust for the fact that elections now happen sooner than they did in 2014. But there'll be more discussion on it at the end, but I'll take questions on it at the end. Proposal 2, as I mentioned, again, this is the language for the right to clean air. Proposal 3, as I mentioned, this is ultimately something that, if passed, can lead to there actually being some advocacy for same-day election and same-day voter registration. So again, this is a provision that's in the state constitution that would have to be removed for people to sort of think about some of those advancements that happen in other states that does not happen in New York. Again, most people would have had this option this year, where in the past you had to either say you were going to be out of the state or that you were physically unable to go to the poll in order, or you had an illness in order to vote by absentee. Here, this would remove the provision in the state constitution and make it a permanent thing that so for people's personal access, they could do this. And as I mentioned, these were both carried in their respective houses by Senator Comrie and Senator Comrie and Assemblymember Vanel. So I think these are definitely great additions.
And Mr. Owens, sorry to cut you off, in the context of us dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, no excuse absentee is so important. A lot of folks had to apply for absentee ballots. So thank you so much for sharing this information.
And it just makes sense in terms of people's busy lives and sort of limiting everything for that. So it's a great tool if it does work for you. And finally, I think one of them, in my day job, I worked for a judge in the state Supreme Court. When I started working with him, he was actually in the civil court. And so basically, in the state constitution, there are provisions about what the dollar amount is for cases that can be brought. So this would ultimately be what is described as an inflation increase. So it would raise the limit, which is currently 25,000 to 50,000. That would allow more cases to go into the lower civil court than currently permissible. Because sometimes with the larger volume in state Supreme Court, something that is just above the civil limit may take longer because it's unable to go into the civil court. So this is what this particular proposal would recommend. So these are just a nutshell what those concepts are. In context of my questions, I think it's always important that, the communities that the assembly member represents participate in these discussions, because these are things that are in the Constitution. These are things that impact your daily lives. So whether you directly go to one of these courts, whether a loved one goes to these courts, these are important decisions. These are also important decisions about voting access. And as I said, there'll be more discussion about the Redistricting Commission. So there'll be additional discussion about how this impacts how lines are drawn, who has the say in how those lines are drawn. And again, just making sure that things are protected in the Constitution versus having them sort of be things that can be changed in law. So that's the sort of quick version of what the 5 proposals are. So to remind everyone, turn over your ballots. They're on there. You can go to the City Board of Elections website, do poll site locator, and it will generate a sample ballot. So you have an opportunity to read them in greater detail before you go to the poll site.
Now, Brother Owens, I have a couple of questions for you. I know you've already answered the question of just giving us a summary of the ballot proposal. So it's really important that people understand to flip over their ballot and vote on the proposals. But in terms of the proposals and the substance of them, how do these ballot proposals impact communities like mine that I represent, that are historically excluded communities?
So I think you mentioned one already. So I think the ability to enhance voter participation, at least in terms of 3 and 4, I think are always great. So anytime you make the voting process easier, it helps marginalized community. It helps those who feel that the system is sort of against them to always make it easy. And so, a lot of the rules require enrollment a year before. But sometimes people don't know until the last minute whether they want to participate. And so we should always make these things as simple as possible. The civil court one, similarly, I think it provides greater access, because if you allow more disputes to go into the lower civil court, this is something where people's needs can be met more expeditiously versus the sort of $1 million disputes that are typically prioritized in the state Supreme Court system. So
Absolutely.
I think that's where it benefits there. And one, I think, deals with primarily how the process of redistricting is done. So as you've mentioned several times already, how lines are drawn have impact for decades. So it's always important to understand how that's going to occur. And number 2 is important because it may ultimately provide greater remedies for those who are in marginalized communities where you typically have, I always remember growing up in Queens, and the bus depots and all of these other things that contribute to health conditions in some of these communities. So this may sort of provide a pathway for when legislators, companies, and others do these things in the future, there is sort of a greater measure for them to sort of say, are we ensuring that we're creating something that will protect the citizens in this particular area? So that's how I feel each of them in a nutshell relate to your question.
And Brother Owens, I want to add on too, for proposal 1, counting incarcerated people at their last residence is so important for communities that like mine that are excluded, because oftentimes there are communities where they're being housed as it relates to incarceration, but those electeds just don't service that community, that population. So putting them back into the districts where they come home from is going to be critical. And also, I want to say demanding basic right to clean air and clean water is going to be transformative for our communities that are often the centers of environmental negatives. So I thank you, Brother Owens, for just sharing those ballot proposals. And I'm looking forward to picking your brain on redistricting as we get to that presentation from our fourth panelist later tonight. Lastly, I want to, before we continue to the next panelist, I want to thank both Dr. Saeed and Brother John Owens, Esquire, who's a local attorney and lawyer and a member of the Civic Engagement Committee for the National Association for the National Advancement for the Association of Colored People, NAACP Jamaica branch. So important, and I'm thankful for y'all coming on tonight. And of course, I want to welcome up Ms. Karen Young. Thank you so much for your patience and listening and being a part of tonight's presentation, tonight's panel discussion. We're so excited that we're talking about this very important issue, civic engagement. We're talking about voting. We're talking about the back of the ballot. We're talking about making sure that people know that we're in the process of early voting. And for the first time, we are voting for the city council in such a in mass number. Over 36 plus seats are up for election this year. Our mayor, our comptroller, you name it, public advocate. So there's so much happening here tonight. So I'm gracious that we're able to have this discussion. So thank you, Ms. Young. Let's introduce you or introduce yourself to our audience tonight, and let's talk.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you inviting me to be here. Assemblymember Anderson, I think you've gotten off to such a great start, and I'm just so excited that you're here to represent this really important community. I've been to the Rockaways a few times. I've been to the beach, and I have a friend down in Breezy Point, although I know that's not your district, but it's just a wonderful area of the city. So I'm really excited to be here talking about it. So you had given me 3 questions to talk about. I guess I should tell
Karen, before you jump right in, tell our viewers who you are, what you do, and as we're in the topic of redistricting, that's your area tonight. And as we open up the panel, and you'll be joined by Isis very shortly.
Right. Sorry about that. So, yes, my name is Karen Young, and the organization that I'm here with tonight is called True Democracy New York. And we are in a partnership with Represent Us, the New York City chapter, and something called the Draw Democracy Campaign. And the Draw Democracy Campaign is trying to raise awareness and get people engaged with this critical issue of redistricting, particularly in New York City. We created something called the Gerrymandering Jigsaw Puzzle, which is based on New York State Senate districts, to make it just really easy for people to visualize and see and feel just how crazy these districts are.
And I have one in my office. I have the redistricting puzzle in my office. I really want people to see it. The gerrymandering
Thank you
puzzle.
so much. Yeah, we really appreciate that. We sent it to a number of key legislators like yourself who signed our Fix Democracy New York pledge back in 2020. So you've taken a stand for democracy, and we're really excited about that. Thank you so much. So just previously, I was involved in the Green Party. I was active in the Green Party for 14 years, including in national leadership. So our group is nonpartisan. And I think partly because of my background in third-party politics, I have a sense of, how a lot of people are shut out from this process, and especially in terms of systemic problems. So that's what we're here to talk about. So did you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, absolutely. And when Isis joins, I'll introduce her as well. And thank you again, Karen, for talking about this very important topic, redistricting, tonight. And
Thank
just
you.
given a little context before you get started, and you're going to say this too, probably, but back in 2014, New Yorkers voted on a ballot item. That's why those ballot proposals on the back of your ballot are so important. That's why I got all of these amazing people here tonight to explain to you all who are watching on YouTube, you all who are watching on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, while we're posting this, how important it is to vote on the back of the ballots. And so in 2014, you voted to create a fairer, more transparent process for redrawing the state and congressional district lines here in New York. And we're one of the few states here in New York that offers an independent redistricting commission. And they have been actively seeking public input and opinion. And we're going to talk about that all throughout tonight as we're in this segment. So Karen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you. The level of independence of this commission is up for debate, but it is a more fair process than what we had before. And as Saeed was saying, we all have a responsibility to participate. That's what's going to make it more responsive to people's needs, is if people get involved and stand up and share their feelings. So I was asked, the first question was, is redistricting a good or a bad thing? Well, our founding fathers intended redistricting to be a dynamic system that would keep electoral districts responsive to changes in the population, so that they just didn't stay the same as people were coming and going and different areas became different. So that was a good thing. However, gerrymandering, which the Brennan Center for Justice describes as the intentional manipulation of district boundaries to discriminate against a group of voters on the basis of their political views or their race, is a bad thing. And gerrymandering is everywhere, including here in New York. And fighting it is really critical to political empowerment, because where those lines are drawn, it determines who you can vote for, who can run for office, and who's going to have a fair chance of winning. So it really has a lot to do with how much your vote counts. Okay. So there are a lot of things that can happen in this gerrymandering process, but in short, it's when political parties draw districts to favor their party as a whole, and certain candidates in particular. They might be incumbents, or they might be new people that they want to bring in because they toe the line, or sometimes they want to get rid of an elected official that they don't like, what they stand for. It could be in their own party, or it could be in the other party. But with all of this, representing voters and their political priorities really isn't a factor in this gerrymandering system. And it gets especially bad when you've got one party controlling a state legislature, which we have here in New York. The Democrats control the state legislature and the governorship. So especially in a situation like that, parties can lock in an unfair advantage where voters won't have the voice they should for the next 10 years. So that's why that's so important right now. Now, many voter suppression tactics, including gerrymandering, absolutely have their roots in slavery and white supremacy.
Absolutely.
Black voters are most often the target. Latinos, Asians, young people, seniors, poor people, they're generally kind of collateral damage that comes into, just that there's this group of people in this country who really feel like they feel threatened by Black people, and they don't want them to have political power. So that's really something to be aware of. There's a great book I've been reading. It's called One Person, No Vote, by Carol Anderson. Came out in 2018, and she talks a lot about this particular impact on Black people of voter suppression. It has a
Can you just
chapter
say
on
that again? Can you just say that again? Definitely, Karen, about the piece of the book and the piece about not wanting Black folks to have political power. It's so important.
Sure. The book is called One Person, No Vote. And I got a great copy of it from my local public library. So the author really traces how it goes back to Reconstruction, when Black people were freed from slavery and started to get the vote. And, white people in the South, they just started setting up all these things that made it impossible for Black people to vote. these poll taxes, these voter tests where they would ask things, people like sort of like count all the jelly beans in a jar, and if you get the number wrong, then you can't vote. There's an incredible panoply of things that happened then and that continue to happen to this day. When you hear about these long lines at the voting, at the poll places, it's only in Black districts. It's insane. And it's certainly not only in the South. It happens here in New York, and in a lot of other places, but it's just very, very clear when you look at it that this, there's just, and the people in the South, they have a lot of power, outsized power in terms of what happens in the nation as a whole. So, I mean, I could go on, but I just think it's very important to understand that with gerrymandering too, the way they draw these districts can disenfranchise Black people. And that's another reason why it's so important to be engaged in this process as people of color, as Black people.
Thank you so much, Karen, from True Democracy, for sharing that in very, very important historical context about why redistricting could be a good or bad thing, what the process is as it relates to communities of color. So I really, really appreciate you sharing that. And I see that we're joined by the Isis McIntosh Green, championing a green shirt because it's just relevant to her last name, but it's also relevant to how we're moving forward and we're thinking about our community as a green, thoughtful, and inspiring community in that respect around this issue. So thank you so much, Isis, for being with us tonight. I have Karen on as well from True Democracy, and we've come to the redistricting segment of tonight's community conference every last Thursday of the month for our viewers who are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We're all over. And so every last Thursday of the month, 7 p.m., we are live in this space where we have lively debates, discussions, and give the information that is so key, critical, and important to the people of the 31st Assembly District. Tonight, we're talking about redistricting. We're talking about the ballot proposals. We're talking about early voting. And we're talking about making sure that our community is prioritized in these spaces. So, Ms. McIntosh Green, tell us who you are, tell us what you do, and tell us how important it is for people to participate in the redistricting process.
Well, definitely. And thank you so much, Assemblymember Anderson, for allowing me to really just be able to speak to your community tonight about this very important and very pressing matter. I think if I could really just provide anything to you all tonight, it's the urgency of this. If you had to think about a time that you had to, well, when is the right time for me to submit my testimony? Or when is the right time for me to figure out what
now
is? Or when is the right time for me to organize maybe amongst my churches or within my community boards? It's now. And if you had to think about, well, when does that period end? Because I need time to get it together. Think Thanksgiving, right? Don't think Christmas. Christmas is too late. Think Thanksgiving. So really, I actually just got off the road yesterday we've been doing hearings since last week. These are our constitutionally mandated hearings. We started up in Buffalo. We went to Rochester. We did Binghamton. I'm also an alumni of Binghamton. So I'll say that some of this Binghamton Green, and I know you have a amazing Binghamton alumna on your staff as well.
We won't hold it against you. The CUNY fans won't hold it against you.
So really, so we did Binghamton, Syracuse, Plattsburgh, and next week we'll be doing Albany, following with White Plains, and then here we are smack dab into the city. So if I can just share my screen really quickly, I want to be able to just show you all. Really, I'll just tell you right now, the date that you all should remember is November 17th. November 17th at 3 p.m. We are going to be at York College. It was important for the commission to find an area that was not just accessible by trains, but also was able to provide parking and really is in the heart with some of the communities that are, protected by the Voting Rights Act, but really also being able to support our CUNY system as well. One of the things that I'd like to say is if you all cannot make it in person, that's fine. we actually encourage you to also be able to tune in virtually. We do have a hybrid component where we will be at the Performing Arts Center. Also, obviously, we are in New York City, so we are working under the guidance in regard to COVID regulations with the New York City administration. So one of the things that we are asking folk to bring is either proof of vaccination or either a negative COVID test within the last 72 hours. I will say one of the things that we wanted to really just break down the barrier to access. So we were able to work with the Department of Health on the state level to provide COVID testing, rapid COVID testing right outside of our venue. So if you're coming from work, if you're coming from school, if you're coming from picking up your child, you don't have to feel like, okay, now I have to make another step. You can still just come right to the campus at the Performing Arts Center, either show proof of vaccination or get your rapid test and come on in. One thing we are asking is that you go on our website. Our website is nyirc.gov, and I'm putting that in the chat right now. The website is going to be very important. I'm going to tell you right now, we have no interest in spamming you. When you go to the website, you can sign up. Keep in mind, this is something that only comes around every 10 years. Once you sign up, you'll be able to get the information first of if there are any changes to our upcoming hearings. When we are submitting our maps to the legislature, you'll just be able to be really on top of that. I know, thankfully, we had someone from Fordham Law School be able to talk about all of the ballots. That's usually, I talk about ballot proposal 1, the proposition 1. And so I'm happy that you all are familiar with that. I think too often people get to the ballot, flip it over, and then say, okay, now what is
this? What's that? How
right?
do I do this? How do I do that?
Or truth be told, when you go to the New York State Board of Elections website, they have a 5-page abstract on the one paragraph that you all see on the ballot, right? So clearly it's a lot more information and it's doing a lot more than just, what meets the eye. And so I think it's important for you all to not just raise awareness about that, but let your friends know as well. It is something that, we rely on really for our democracy. Another thing that I would like to point out is sometimes there is, I think, some hesitation to testifying, perhaps because people feel like they don't know what to say. What you know about your community really and truly is enough. What we realize is when we're defining communities of interest, and I know there are a lot of great organizations, probably like yourself, Karen, who've been going around the state and really trying to get people to help them with preparing their testimony. You will have 3 minutes to testify, followed by a 2-minute question and answer period. I'm going to be very honest. Not that I like to talk, which I do, but it's so much sensitive information when you're talking about a congressional map, a state Senate map, a state assembly map, and really the needs of your community that you may not be able to fit that all in 3 minutes. We actually encourage you to also submit written testimony. Submit your version of a map. What do you think your community should look like? What do you think will be able to meet the needs of your area? Of course, there are some districts that must be drawn based on the Voting Rights Act. And that may be something that you're saying, hey, we can still draw this district and make this community whole. I know that I grew up in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn, and I know that my state senator, I have 2 state senators in the same NYCHA development. So it depended on what side of the street you lived on, right? And so what became difficult is—
we have that here in Queens.
Right? So what became difficult is, do you go to the state senator that represents your physical address to fix the park that is technically in another member's address, right? We are hoping to be able to work out some of these things. But to be quite frank, if we don't have people bringing this to our attention, perhaps maybe we were able to clarify those in some of the versions of the maps that went out, but maybe other issues were created. Now would be the time to really fix that. If I could leave anything with you all, because I also hear, not necessarily in meetings, but maybe at receptions or maybe, in passing, of people who they have mixed feelings of presenting because maybe they're afraid of pushback that they may receive from their community or from their elected official. And I can't speak for that. I'm going to be quite frank. But what I will say is when you look back 10 years ago when we did this process, how many of your elected officials were still representing their seat? You may have some, but you probably don't have all. And so what I'd like to point out with that is just because you may have a member that has the final say so on the process doesn't mean that you shouldn't advocate for the needs of your community today and where your community is headed. Right? I know, for instance, there are certain state resources that may be necessary. Make sure that's in your district. Make sure that's in your testimony. If there's certain federal or environmental issues that are unifying you all, make sure you bring that to us with your congressional representatives and really what your congressional district should or would look like. I don't want you all to feel compelled to choose a map. Right? We were able to release 2 sets of maps, and there are the nuances of why certain maps were drawn, right? And so I'm not here to speak to that. But what I am here to say is, even if you feel like one version of this map maybe speaks to my needs a little bit more, but it kind of misses the goal, right? Tell us that. Literally, we are prepared to be able to say, okay, if you need to move it over to this avenue because you are, splitting a community, 2 communities that thrive on the same business zone, right? That's the type of the information that we need to know, because who can tell us better and more information about your homes and your districts than you? And really, I just thank you so much, Assembly Member, for even hosting this, right? Because I know you get such a varying age demographic, right? An ethnic demographic. And for so many people, they didn't even realize that this process was going on. I almost wish that when census materials were handed out and when we were on food pantry lines, right, telling people to fill out your census, that they realized that it was 2 parts to it. It wasn't just about receiving the federal dollars, but it was also about making sure that you had the adequate redistricting representation, right? This is constitutionally mandated, and it's going to happen every 10 years. And at this point, you have the most ability to affect the change. And I just thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. McIntosh Green. I'm so glad that you're a young person yourself and you're so passionate about this subject matter, because our communities really, really need advocates, really, really need individuals who care about the civic process, who want to be a part of the process. And I want to ask you both a question, and then I'm going to open up to all of our panelists as we talk about redistricting in the last phase of tonight's community conference. Every last Thursday of the month, 7 p.m., we're here on all social media platforms talking about the things that are so important to our community. We're having a conference with our community. So the question I want to ask is, there is an independent redistricting commission. They've been actively seeking public input for redistricting. They want to hear from the community about what will keep the community whole, will keep the community together, to keep the community resourced, to protect Voting Rights Act districts. And so I want to know, how can New Yorkers make sure their voices are heard in the redistricting process? Let me get Karen, and then I'll go on to Ms. McIntosh Green.
All right, thank you very much. It's very nice to hear from you, Isis, and to see you. I know that you're in there where the in the room where it's all happening. So it's very exciting to see you and have you here. Well, what I would say is the most important thing that people can do to be heard is to testify at these hearings, which start in New York City on November 9th. They save the best for last with Queens, which is going to be the last one on the 17th. The second most important thing is to tell your friends and neighbors to do the same. And third, I would say, is to remember that the legislature, God love them, is going to vote on the commission's maps at some point, and they may wind up throwing them in the garbage and creating their own maps, because that's something that our process allows for. I won't go into all the details, but that is the case. So you need to be prepared to contact your legislators forcefully and demand fair maps and tell them the specific things that you want to see. Now, our website at drawdemocracy.org has a lot of resources and tools. If you would go there, and I put that in the chat also, I'm not sure that's getting out to the viewers though, so maybe somebody can check on that. But if you scroll down a little bit from the top, you see an area that's called Quick Links. And what you would do first is click on Find Your District. We have links there for you to find all your districts, Assembly, State Senate, and Congressional. You just put in your address and it'll find you your district. So then when you find your district, or all three of them, depending on how much time and energy you have, you can go in there and you can zoom in to see the detail of how the lines are drawn in your neighborhood. For example, I was noticing in Khalil's district, it includes part of the Rockaways, and there's a chunk of the peninsula between 53rd and 48th and Beach Channel to Rockaway Beach Boulevard that's cut out of his district. He's got three sides of it in his district, and then this one chunk is just taken out. And I don't know why, but I do know that it should probably all be part of one district. And I was interested to hear you mention NYCHA, because I've studied all the city and I see these NYCHA developments cut in half, put in one district or the other. In North Brooklyn, for example, I live in Brooklyn, you've got the Sumner houses and the Marcy houses, big developments. They're very close together, and yet the districts have been very carefully drawn so that a legislature has Sumner but not Marcy, or has Marcy but not Sumner. And they do this to dilute the power. So I think it's really important that people tell those stories and tell how hard it is. We're going into winter. You know there's going to be another winter of no heat, no hot water at NYCHA. And you got to be able to go to these legislators and say, hey, and if he's responsible for this whole area or she's responsible, they're going to have to listen more. So I just think that's so important. You got to go and look at those maps. Also, we have tips about how to write your testimony. It's only about 400 words. It doesn't have to be a big deal. We say, as Isa said, that you don't have to be an expert. You're the one who knows your community best. So you want to talk about your community, and that's going to have the most impact. And I can say for a fact it's true, because I testified in the first round of the hearings about my district, Senate District 25, and then I went to look at the draft maps, and I saw that at least the Democratic map, they took my suggestions. I was really pumped. So it really is so important, and it can be worthwhile to get in there and do it. So again, you can go to our website. I also want to shout out our partners, APA Voice and the Central Queens Redistricting Coalition. They're doing a lot of great work in this area, and they're very rooted in the community. So you're welcome to reach out to them as well. But I don't care if you call me or email me. If you need help, I will get it for you. And
thank you so much, Ms. Young and Ms. Green McIntosh Green.
So I'm actually happy, and I'm able to see some of the questions that are popping up here. But for the ones that we missed, I asked that.
Well, we're gonna do those at the Q&A section when we're
okay, not a problem. I think one of the things that folk try to be able to realize, and let me see if I can share now. Can you all see? No.
Are we able to?
No, it says Chrome has lost permission.
Uh-oh.
Okay. No idea what that
I'll make sure my folks on the back end take a look at that and try to be
okay. It's probably my Chrome side. Really, what I wanted to be able to show you all was just the map, which again, I'll just point out, go to our website, nyirc.gov, because I understand, Assemblyman, that you have a range of folk, right? You represent parts of, and really parts of Far Rockaway, but you also represent other parts of Queens. Really what we're looking at, and why I'd say this is important, is it's a numbers game, right? If I had to think about a congressional level, we lost one congressional seat this time. We've been losing seats since 1952. Okay. In 1951, we had 45 congressional members representing the state of New York. And we've been losing at least 2 since then, every redistricting cycle. They actually expected, as in the rest of the country, expected that New York was going to lose 2 again this year. And it's really because of the efforts of so many organizations and so many electeds really getting out there and getting the census filled out, that unfortunately we still lost 1, but not 2, right? Back in 2010, when the congressional districts were drawn for 27 members, the average population was about 710,000 people. Since then, since we've had to essentially eliminate, or I don't like to say eliminate a district, but because really everyone will have representation, right? So one district had to be absorbed. What ended up happening is that population had to move to almost 770,000 people. That's about 60,000 people added to each district, right? And so where we have areas, maybe in some of the upstate communities or certain communities where we saw a loss of population, maybe they were averaging about 680,000 people. Really, to put that in perspective, it means that the resources that were intended for 710,000, right, is now going to only 680,000. However, now that they have to make this new adjustment, they're essentially adding about 90,000 people to a district, right? When we look at maybe Queens and we look at some of our congressional areas in Queens, we all in New York City are located in a unique place, because to the right, you have or let me not use right, to the east, you have the Long Island border, right? You have your Nassau County area. And then to the west, you have your Kings County border. So when we're looking at population and everyone has to be represented, they're going to be members that have to cover multiple counties or have to dangle the line between the Queens border and the Brooklyn border, or the Queens border and the Bronx border, or the Queens border and the Nassau border. And so what's crucial is to be able to share what communities most align with your community of interest, right? When we look at this, we're not putting in any incumbent addresses. We're not looking at election data. We're simply looking at the U.S. Census data, and we are hearing from testimony and communities of interest and going in line with the Voting Rights Act, right? Of districts that maybe in the past weren't drawn, but finally have hit the population that they can be drawn. And it's for you to be able to say, we're most intimately connected with the community next door or the community across the road. I can't tell you where you go to your supermarkets. I can't tell you your hospitals, right? What I will say is that's the purpose of having 3 different levels to operate under. When we're looking at the assembly level, that's about 134,000 people, right? You can probably put together 2 community boards and have your population, right? But when you start to look at Senate, it grows to 320,000 people. When you look at Congress, it goes to almost 770,000 people. We have to figure out a way that captures the needs of the community, where you all are able to still have your competitive districts, but have districts that represent your values, right? And if I could point out anything of why this is important for you all is, once again, maybe you're growing a family here. Maybe you're growing up here. Maybe you have kids to worry about later on. For 10 years, these are going to be really the seats and the districts that you all have to continue to move and thrive in.
Thank you so much, Ms. McIntosh Green, and thank you so much, Ms. Young. Let me bring up all the panelists who joined us here tonight as we're getting ready to close out tonight's discussion around redistricting, around voting, around civic engagement, around participation. We have a few questions. Well, I have a few questions. The audience has some questions. Again, we're live streaming every Thursday night, every last Thursday of the month, 7 p.m., community conference right here. We're live on Facebook. We're live on Instagram. We're live on Twitter. And we're active in our YouTube channel. Follow me at Khalil Anderson. I'm blessed and proud to be the New York State Assembly member for the beautiful, beautiful 31st Assembly District. And I'm so thankful that we have an engaged, active, and empowered constituency here in the Rockaways, here in Rosedale, here in Springfield Gardens, and all across the 31st Assembly District. We have so much work to do in making sure that our voices are heard when we go to the ballot box, making sure that our voices are heard when we're drawing our districts as a community, making sure that our voices are heard in the voting and electoral process overall. So I thank the amazing men and women who joined us here tonight. They're very credentialed individuals. Thank you for being here tonight. So this question is for all panelists. I have a question from Miss. Let me just go to the comment section. We have a question from Miss Teresa Scott. She asked this question at 8:06 p.m. on Facebook. Thank you so much, Miss Teresa Scott, for asking this key and critical question. It's open to all panelists to answer it. How does this this affect Far Rockaway? And I think when she says this, I guess it means redistricting. Any panelist can answer.
Well, I would say that it affects Far Rockaway just as it affects every district. One thing I know is that we've added about 1 million people population in New York City. So we really should be having more districts in the city. And that should mean that there are fewer people in each district. And so your voice should mean more. I know that in your district, Khalil, there's a part of Far Rockaway that's part of it. There's another part that's not. That may not be the best thing for Teresa. It may be that she's got, she doesn't have you as a rep. Maybe she has another assembly member who isn't as responsive. It may be that it's the community Far Rockaway is just split up between too many representatives, and that makes it hard for the community to have a voice. I think that's what we see most often in some of these areas, that there's just little parts, bits and pieces of a community that go to many different representatives. And it means that they, you know, they're not so important to any one representative, and it really makes it hard to be heard. So that's why it affects you, I'd say.
Thank you so much, Ms. Young. Mr. Owens, Ms. McIntosh Green, you guys want to add anything to tonight's conversation around the question Ms. Teresa Scott asked?
No, I think she answered it well.
Excellent. All right. So my staff will be making sure that any questions that populate on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on all the platforms we're on tonight are able to be answered by our amazing panelists. Again, we have Karen Young from True Democracy. We have Isis McIntosh Green, who's the Deputy Co-Executive Director of the New York State Independent Redistricting Commission. We have Brother John Owens, who's a member of the Jamaica NAACP as the Civic Engagement Committee. So it's so important that I'm thankful that you're here. And we have Dr. Sarah Saeed, who is the Executive Director of the New York Executive Director and Chair, of the Civic Engagement Commission that you all voted for on the back of your ballot. That's why these ballot initiatives are so key, critical, and important. We had a question earlier this week. We had a constituent actually call our office who's been engaged in the process of learning more about this redistricting, learning more about the back of the ballot. He called in this week, and we wanted to make sure we captured his voice, Elijah. He asked us, as it relates to the redistricting process, what ways does redistricting, or what ways should redistricting continue to encourage more people to participate? He's young, he's engaged, and we want to make sure that he understands how redistricting can encourage more people to participate in the process. So what does that look like for our redistricting folks who are on the call tonight?
Well, really, it starts with one, having conversations like these, and don't feel like you need to have this conversation, you know, with people maybe representing the commission. You can have it in your churches. You can have it, you know, just in your coffee houses. You can have it in your Facebook groups. Let's be honest, you can have it on Clubhouse. Let's be able to first break down the barrier of access with this, right? The whole point of taking the initial drawing process out of the hands of the state legislature was the idea that the people would be able to have a greater voice and a greater say. And some people say, well, what if when it gets to the legislature, they throw it out anyway? And I'll say to you, if you submit your testimony, it's going to be very hard for your elected officials to completely go against what you as your constituents have been able to outline as the needs of your community, right? And if that's the case, then they're going to have a lot to answer to, not to us, but to you. And so that's why it's important to be able to really demystify what's going on, right? To be able to say, look, I have certain maybe environmental needs, or I have certain federal needs. Perhaps we should be in the same congressional district, so that we're pushing for that agenda together, right? No one can answer that better than you, and really it can spark a great debate, right? I grew up in NYCHA. I lived in NYCHA for 20 years, and one of the things that was so interesting is to kind of hear, going from a community that had 29 NYCHA developments in one district to another member who may only have 6 NYCHA developments in one district, right? Figuring out where's your collective power. Do you have a greater collective power by having 15,000 residents, right, of one constituency advocating to one member? Or maybe you feel like you have a greater collective power by having multiple members in the legislature advocating for your one issue, because maybe within, let's say, 3 miles, there are 2 different assembly members, maybe still 1 senator, right? I can't tell you that, right? Because the nuances and what works in Far Rockaway or what works in Rosedale, which I don't believe has a NYCHA development, but I'm only saying that because one of my best friends lives in Rosedale, and I'm like, didn't see a NYCHA development over there. And what works maybe in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn may be different from what works in the Bed-Stuy section of Brooklyn, right? Or may be different from what works in the South Bronx, right? And so don't feel like this thing has to be cut and dry, right? It's really what's best for your community. Maybe you have certain transportation issues affecting your community, where maybe one side of Far Rockaway doesn't have the same access to transportation as the other side of Far Rockaway. You would be able to tell us if uniting that maybe answer some of those problems, or no, it's not going to solve it because, we don't eat over there. We don't worship over there. We don't know. And what I'd like to say is we've had someone testify as young as 16 years old on our hearing, right? When we went to Syracuse, they literally hosted a class about the redistricting cycle, and the commissioner sat back after the hearing and was able to just go back and forth and answer just some of the questions about the process. Don't think that you are too young, too old, you're not connected maybe with a political organization to be a part of this process. It's your community. Take it over.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We have one more question that we got during the week. A little bit of hysteria that we saw on social media. We want to make sure people know that they can voice their opinions, they can come, they can testify, because this is a democratic process. And so there was a little hysteria this week where folks heard rumors and asked questions about Queens and Nassau County sharing elected officials in the redistricting process. Is there any truth to that? And how would that work in practice? Where can communities be kept whole? Sort of just this discussion around making sure that resources that are often very limited can be kept together or brought together. We got that question, and I guess that's what the person's sentiment is. So I wanted to hear from either one of our panelists tonight. Is there truth to it? And how does it work in practice?
Well, if I can just, I can speak briefly to that. I mean, we have a lot of districts, and I'm most familiar with the state Senate, but I know even in the Senate, we have a lot of districts that cross borders. We have districts that include the Bronx and parts of Westchester. We do have districts, I believe, that include part of Queens and Nassau. Personally, I don't think that should happen. I think that those county lines ought to be respected. I think with the congressional districts, they are very large, and sometimes it's harder to confine them maybe to the city borders. But for the Senate, the Assembly, I really think that should be fought. And I would say too, just people, I would love to see more on the Assembly and the Senate than the congressional districts, because there's so much talk about Congress. But, in Albany, they have a $200 billion budget. It has a lot to do with what happens in everybody's neighborhood. So it's important to know who those representatives are and where those districts are.
Thank you so much, Ms. Young. Ed, anyone else want to take a whack at that question? Because I got one specifically for you, Dr. Owens, and then one specifically for you, Dr. Syed. I mean, Mr. Owens, and then Dr. Syed.
Oh, claim the doctor for him, though.
There we go.
I would like to speak on that for a moment. Very briefly, I'll say me speaking, understanding that I'm here participating as a part of the Redistricting Commission, you'll get a very different answer if you ask me this at a coffee shop, which is why I say go back to your communities and have these conversations. Also look at the data that's attached to it. This whole process, if I've been able to take away anything, not even from working with the Redistricting Commission, but being able to work in government, right? I was blessed to be able to be chief of staff for a member of the assembly for 4 years prior to this role, and be able to work on the Senate side, right? Like fresh out of college. Like, so one of the things that I think is key about this is there are building blocks that make up your district, right? Maybe it isn't important for your entire community board to also be represented by the same assembly member. Maybe it is, right? Only you can be able to speak to that. And so really a lot of the questions and a lot of the concern that people are having, I want to point you to our website, nyirc.gov, and submit that testimony. It really informs this process so much. But once again, I will point out, when we're dealing with population, county lines is something that in a lot of areas, if that's something that's the will of the community, that I believe commissioners on both sides of the aisle have been trying to respect. But when you have to draw a district that's 320,000 people and you're already at a border, do you choose to not go with maybe the Voting Rights Act suggestion, which is this is a population, this is a historically underrepresented population that has above 50%, or maybe it's just hitting the 50% threshold, but now you're going to cross a county line. Do you now combine them with maybe a growing population, right? I know we've heard from a lot of different organizations. We've heard from the APAs, we've heard from the NAACPs, we've heard from the ALDEFs, right? And what we're seeing is, living in New York City, right? This melting pot. Essentially, we all live within a few blocks of each other. And so you really, if I could suggest anything, is think about this from a 10 years moving forward. Do I have a better opportunity to draw districts that represent my community needs if all of my community board is in the same district? Or do I have a better opportunity to do that if these historically voting rights districts remain the same, right? If we're able to continue, so I'll point at Rosedale, for instance. Some people may feel that maybe Rosedale and Valley Stream are more communities of interest than maybe Rosedale and other parts of Queens. I can't answer that, but that's what we're expecting you all to be able to. And really the way I'll point it back is draw a map, show us the suggestion. If there's a way to draw the map that doesn't cross a county line, that keeps your community intact, we want to see that, right? That's really going to be able to inform this process a lot more.
And thank you so much for that. Just answer that question in that way so that people can understand that they are empowered to make decisions on behalf of what their communities look like. So for brother Owens here, redistricting, when used incorrectly, and I think we talked about it here tonight, can take away political opportunities in Black and Brown communities and neighborhoods rather than actually create them. How does the Voting Rights Act of 1965 protect against redistricting injustices that are faced or can potentially be faced by our communities in this process?
So I think Ms. McIntosh Green sort of spoke to it, and so it presents some challenges, but also the guidelines in terms of what they're supposed to be looking at. So there are efforts to always try to keep certain communities together to ensure that you're not creating non-competitive districts. So there are a host of guidelines, and I think a lot of that happens, but it's also the challenge of populations growing, changing, populations becoming different. So there's always these tensions. So, historically, you'll think of Harlem, right? Sort of having that continual Black representative. But the last redistricting, it sort of, the district changed, it went further up into Washington Heights. And so a lot of that is a dynamic of being mindful of that, sort of being aware of what these communities look like. But I think it's only repeating what everyone has said. People don't know what these communities look like unless those people who are in the community say, these are why these things are important. So, you know, they may know a lot about a lot of different things, but no one really knows as much about the community as those people who sort of pass it each particular day. And I think that's why a process where the public can sort of chime in, either testifying, submitting their written testimony, are all helpful in people understanding, hey, don't split this neighborhood, don't draw that particular line there. But it's really meant to be a guide in terms of trying to balance all these particular things. I've heard from people who've done this, I've sat in other panels. It is not always the easiest thing because you have to sometimes make competing compromises. And so sometimes it may not be to the advantage of one community, but it's still meant to ensure that there are some guidelines and there are, litigation actions people will take if they say it didn't necessarily adhere to those. But lawyers are prone to make things more complicated. So it is a complicated thing from a lawyer's perspective, but that's what it's intended to do, provide the guidelines of what should be considered when you are trying to draw maps, making sure that they're districts, making sure they're generally similar in size, because you don't want, as example was given, you don't want a district having far more people than the neighboring district. And so then when the resources are distributed, they're not equally done because one person has to do more, less with more. And so those are the things you want to consider with respect to what the voting rights guidelines provided.
Thank you so much, Mr. Owens. And for Dr. Saeed, I want to talk about what the New York City Civic Engagement Commission is doing around educating our people around these civic processes and civic. So I know that you guys, civic processes. So I know that you guys are doing amazing work around getting out the word about the city elections. I know you guys are doing work around the back of the ballot, making sure people are educated and aware on it. But what does getting people civically engaged and participating, not just in this process of redistricting, but also long-term community boards, precinct councils, what is your agency doing to just spur and produce and expand participation in all of these democratic processes, including redistricting?
I think one of the things that we are working towards is creating like a centralized portal for information where people can connect to a lot of different opportunities, because people don't necessarily know about what kinds of opportunities there are. So our vision is for the participate.nyc.gov site to include like connections to a lot of different opportunities. Right now, these opportunities are kind of spread out over different websites. So we're hoping to create like a central space. And then the other thing is just like, having conversations like this and educating New Yorkers about the basics of how they can get involved. I found in the past that when I've done workshops about Civics 101, this is kind of getting lost, in our school systems, in our educational systems. We're not really getting sort of foundational civics, right? So the more opportunities that we have like this through electeds and other organizations, creating spaces for people to learn, I think that's something that we really want to do, is to create that kind of learning space for participation.
Which is so key, critical, and important. And I want to thank all of our amazing panelists for, first of all, 8:30 at night, making sure the constituents of the 31st Assembly District here in Southeast Queens know about redistricting, know their voice, know their power, know what's on the back of the ballot, know the things that we're voting on this year: mayor, comptroller, public advocate, city council, all of these very important positions, judges on the state and city level. All of that is happening this year. Early voting is happening from October 23rd to October 31st, Halloween. Put your best costume on and get out there and vote. So important. I want to say that. But it's also important that November 17th, if you are someone here in the 31st Assembly District, here in Southeast Queens, Nassau, wherever the heck you are here in the state of New York, you must be a part of the civic participation processes. You must testify. You must share your thoughts. You must share your opinion. Show up to community board. Get involved. Get engaged. It's so important because we need more voices at the table in communities that have historically been disadvantaged and historically have been suppressed in their voice and in their activism. So I want to thank the amazing folks that took the time out tonight to share these jewels with you here in the 31st Assembly District. I want to make sure that people know all the websites that were shared here tonight. That's why we're going to create a resource list and share it out to our email blast so that people could follow up with Draw Democracy NY that Karen put in the chat, that people could follow up with the IRC, that people could follow up with the New York City Civic Engagement Roundtable, that people could follow up with Brother Owens, who's a member of the Jamaica NAACP branch, and you should get involved in that branch and any other civic group organization that's doing work in our community. So I thank my panelists for joining me here tonight, for staying on and providing such valuable and important information here tonight. We love cats, and we love each and every one of the individuals who took the time out to spend time with my constituency tonight. So thank you so much for being on here tonight. Any last closing thoughts, Dr. Syed, as you unmuted?
No, I just want to say thank you. It's a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of it, and thank you for fueling it.
Thanks, everybody. It was awesome.
Thank you. Thanks again. And let's continue to keep our communities active, engaged, and in part of the civic participation. And thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to close out. Thank you, everyone. All right. Well, you guys heard it here first.